Welcome back to Horrifying Stories. In today's episode, you will hear of various homeless or elderly people who lodge in a Victorian bungalow at 1426 F Street in Sacramento, California. This bungalow was operated by a sweet grandma named Dorothea Puente. One day, police received a report of something odd in the house, and this is their horrifying story. Viewer discretion is advised. Dorothea Helen Gray was born on January 9, 1929 in Redlands, California. She was born to two alcoholic parents. Her father died when she was only 4, while her mother passed away when she turned 6. Orphaned at such a young age, Dorothea and her siblings found themselves bouncing between orphanages to relatives' homes and to foster homes. This ugly childhood and poor upbringing led Dorothea to put up with unstable and odd jobs and go through several heartbreaking divorces. However, after her 4th failed marriage, Dorothea has now dedicated her life to running a boarding house taking in people considered as shadows of society. These individuals fall under hard cases category that seemed impossible to find homes for, such as homeless people, elderly, individuals with mental illness, or people with issues of substance abuse. People who did not have any relatives and friends to take care of them found an unlikely welcoming shelter under the care of Dorothea. A sweet and soft-spoken old lady, people would often see Dorothea in her big eyeglasses, short gray hair, and vintage chiffon dresses outside her old Victorian house located at 1426 F Street in Sacramento, California. People had always admired her for being a warm and friendly neighbor that she was. Aside from her endearing personality, having worked as a cook at a restaurant before opening the boarding house, Dorothea also loves to work in the kitchen. She prepares warm and delicious home-cooked meals and provides food and drinks for her disabled and senile tenants. A seemingly good homemaker, she has always kept the house clean and very well maintained, and she's also often seen busy in her garden filled with healthy tomato crops and new flower beds. She was not only endearing and domesticated, but also someone who somehow longed for somebody else's affection, as she frequently told people she got acquainted with to call her grandma. Indeed, she was the epitome of an ideal grandmother. She gave free food on Wednesdays and Thursdays and called it Burrito Day. Dorothea has made it her mission to actively help both inside and outside the walls of her home in Sacramento. Dorothea is well recognized to be a big-hearted philanthropist in their neighborhood. She is a committed and respected social figure in Sacramento's Hispanic community, sponsoring charity events, scholarships, and radio programs, donating many clothes to charities, holding Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, and helping those who needed assistance in signing up for Social Security benefits are just some of the few good deeds that Dorothea tirelessly and consistently does for her community. As if all of this were not enough, she is also known to have funded campaigns on both sides, Democrats and Republicans. Politicians loved her as she would always purchase banquet tables for political events and was often seen interacting with congressmen and state and county officials. There was no doubt about it, Dorothea Puente was looked up to in her district, an example worthy to be emulated. Now, there was a certain outreach counselor named Judy Moyes looking for a home for one of her patients. This particular patient has become very close to her as she remembers her own son in him. Alvaro Bert Gonzalez Montoya was diagnosed with schizophrenia and could not find a home anywhere in Sacramento. Judy badly wanted to place Bert in a shelter that does not only provide for his physical necessities, but would also have the patience and care he needs knowing that Bert is mentally ill. With much thought, she searched for care homes that would take Bert in, and Dorothea Puente had been highly recommended. She was made aware that Dorothea had shadow people as tenants in her very own home. Being the meticulous person that she was, Judy personally went with Bert to check Dorothea and her house to see for herself if it would be good for Bert. Entering the Victorian boarding house, they were greeted with a box full of kittens that kept Dorothea very occupied. While Judy and Dorothea were conversing about the house and her terms for her tenants, Dorothea was also busy feeding the kittens. This gave Judy the impression that what she heard was true. She indeed was a warm-hearted person. After they talked, Judy proceeded to check on the rooms. It was quite simple but neat. And so, Judy left the house very impressed with the sweet and wonderful landlady. Now, tenants pay their rents through their social security checks, and for people like Bert who doesn't have any connection with his family, Dorothea made herself the payee of Bert's checks. Bert moved into the boarding house and Judy kept in touch with him. She would call and check on Bert every now and then. As always, Judy was pleased when she came to visit and learned how Bert had built friendships inside the house and even had his own recliner and TV. Everything was working out well with Bert, and it very much satisfied Judy. After a few months, Judy made her usual checkup call to Bert, but it was Dorothea who answered and told him that Bert wasn't available, so Judy went about her day. The following week, Judy called the boarding house again to check up on Bert, and she received the same response as the last. Judy felt really uncomfortable since she really wanted to know how Bert is doing. Persistent, Judy called again in the next few days, and this time she was told that Bert went to Mexico for a fiesta, and she was told that he'll be back on Friday that week. This really startled Judy because this is completely not like the Bert she knew. Come Friday, Dorothea told Judy that Bert came back from Mexico and a relative picked him up and she does not know where they went. Judy became so worried that she decided to call the police to report a missing person. Bothered with suspicion, Judy decided to ask a tenant regarding the circumstances inside the house. She was able to talk to a man named John Sharp. She asked John if Bert really went to Mexico and how was their situation in the house with Dorothea. Judy heard the words she feared to hear. John told her that Bert did not go to Mexico and that he has not seen Bert for 2 months now. But what sparked greater suspicion in Judy was what John said next, that Dorothea has been digging a lot of holes in her garden. On November 7, 1988, a homicide and missing persons unit detective answered the call of Judy. This prompted Detective Cabrera to send a police officer to the boarding house to investigate the disappearance of Bert. The officer questioned the tenants and Dorothea, and everyone spoke the same thing, that Bert had left with a relative. Everyone cooperated and the investigation went smoothly until the officer was just about to leave and one of the tenants slipped a note that said, "She wants me to lie to you." John Sharp, Dorothea's tenant who talked to Judy about Bert, was the man who gave the note to the officer. He was then called to the station for further questioning. There, he told the investigator what Dorothea had asked him to tell them, that he saw John returning from Mexico but had left again with a relative. At this point, the investigation shifted from finding Bert to studying the profile of Dorothea. The detective now started researching about the highly esteemed Dorothea Puente. He found out that Dorothea was on federal parole and was imprisoned for theft, forgery, and using stupefying drugs. The very first crime which Dorothea was convicted of was when she was 19 years old for felony forgery of writing fictitious checks. When she was 21, she worked as a prostitute in Sacramento, and after 10 years, she was arrested and prosecuted for being a prostitute and operating a brothel. In 1982, Dorothea was again arrested for a report against her by Malcolm Mackenzie. Mr. Mackenzie reported to the police that she met Dorothea in a bar and had some drinks. After that, they went to his apartment and he could not move. He felt paralyzed, but he could still see Dorothea taking things from his apartment, took his ring, and left. There were several other reports from elderly people during the same period of time, where she posed as a medical doctor and administered stupefying drugs and had the same symptoms as Mr. Mackenzie. After the victims regained their motion, jewelry, coins, and checks were missing. Dorothea went to prison in 1982 for 5 felonies and pleaded guilty. In an unforeseen twist, the sweet and respectable grandma was actually a notorious and cunning criminal after all. This alarmed Detective Cabrera, so he and his partner immediately went to Dorothea's boarding house with the parole officer and investigated further. Willingly, Dorothea agreed to let the detectives search her house. Upon searching her room, what they constantly found were blue capsules everywhere. It was from a pill called diazepam, which is used to treat anxiety, alcohol withdrawal, and seizures. Some people use diazepam as a sleeping pill as it can also make a person feel sleepy, dizzy, and forgetful. Knowing now that Dorothea was using knockout drugs to steal from her victims, the detective knew something was terribly odd in that house. Before Detective Cabrera left the house, he did not forget the social worker's persistent request that they must also dig in her garden. So to wrap up their search, he then asked permission from Dorothea if they could look into her garden, to which she gave her consent. Dorothea had a small garden area, so the two detectives and the parole officer started digging. They agreed to dig 3 random holes in the garden. As the law officers were busy digging the yard, they kept finding trash in the soil. Just then, in the middle of their digging, Detective Cabrera looked up and saw Dorothea on the second-story porch looking straight at him. It was a bit creepy, but that did not scare him. He shrugged it off and just went on to dig further. Not long after, they dug up some pieces of cloth and some kind of leather pieces which he could not specifically identify, but somehow it looked like beef jerky to him. The trio continued to dig further. It was until they reached 3 feet deep that they heard a muted thud as the shovel hit something. They dug some more, and initially, the 3 could not tell what it was that looked like a tree root. Detective Cabrera grabbed it and pulled it out with a very strong jerk. What they unearthed left them shocked and astonished. It was a human femur. It was then that the leather pieces that looked like beef jerky made sense to them. They came to a dreadful realization that it was actually human flesh that had come off from the bone. With significant cause for concern, all the tenants and Dorothea were immediately called in for questioning. Dorothea was questioned hard, but she answered every question in a deadpan manner. She looked the detective straight in the eye and denied all the accusations. Unfortunately, the authorities could not arrest Dorothea despite the growing suspicion, as they were not yet able to establish her as the suspect. Due to the lack of evidence to link Dorothea with the body found in her yard, she was released, but the digging continued to check if there are more bodies buried in her garden. The next few days, authorities were continuing to excavate her garden, and in the middle of their digging, a tenant called Detective Cabrera and told him that Dorothea wanted to talk to him. Detective Cabrera went along with Dorothea's request and went up the house, and he saw Dorothea by the kitchen. She then asked him if she could go out to get a cup of coffee by her nephew's house around the corner because all the activities happening in her house were making her nervous and anxious. At that time, he did not have anything to hold her, so he said yes to her request. Dorothea left, and Detective Cabrera went back outside to continue digging. As they were digging with their shovels, they were able to unearth another human leg. Detective Cabrera told his commander that they now have another body. His commander then asked him where Dorothea was, and he said she went around the corner to get a cup of coffee. They hurriedly tried to find her in the coffee shop, but when they got there, she was gone. Dorothea was now on the run. Authorities then put out a be on the lookout bulletin for Dorothea Puente, and an ongoing search for her was in motion. Investigators continued to dig in her backyard and have exhumed a total of 7 bodies, including Bert's body. She instantly became a wanted fugitive. News spread like wildfire all over the country, calling on everyone to be aware, and if anyone notices anything suspicious, to immediately report to the authorities. Dorothea was later arrested in Los Angeles. A man was able to recognize her in a bar and reported it to the officials. She was then found in a motel and was arrested. The case of Dorothea's trial started in October 1992 and ended after a year. It took a month for the jury to deliberate, and she was found guilty for 3 murders, but the jury could not agree on the others. To the district attorney, Dorothea would have deserved to be put on death row. The victims literally had nothing but their lives and their social security checks, and Dorothea took it all. She took everything they had left, and the rightful price should have been everything she had as well, even her life. Sadly, up until her trial and conviction, she still managed to convince one juror that she was just a harmless grandma. When news of her conviction was out, a couple of social workers were overcome with sorrow and regret because, like Judy, they too had brought many vulnerable individuals and entrusted them under Dorothea's care, yet not a single disappearance triggered suspicion. As for Judy, the outreach counselor, she partly blamed herself for what happened to Bert. She placed Bert in a supposedly caring house for the dispossessed, but it turned out to be his gruesome grave. However, Judy Moyes was in fact the unsung hero. With her great passion for her clients and piercing dedication to her job, she was able to dig up a psychotic serial killer grandma. Thank you for making it this far. If you like this video, please click the subscribe button to get updated on the latest horrifying stories. And if you enjoyed this episode, please click the like button. Again, thank you and we'll see you in the next one.